on the evening of September 13th, 1746. The inhabitants of the small French port town of Loyang were greeted by the sight of a merchant vessel sailing into their inner harbor. Its tattered sails flapping in the wind like the wings of a large wounded bird. And while it was an unremarkable ship otherwise, the townspeople soon realized that something was very wrong with her. There were no crew members on deck to guide her in. There was no pilot to direct her from the shore. And as she moved toward the docks, people noticed that the ship's flag had been lowered to half-mast, as if in respect to some dead person or thing. It wasn't long before dock workers managed to secure a line to the ship and board her, expecting to find a handful of survivors and perhaps even some good news, but they were met with silence. Everywhere they looked, the workers could find no living soul. They searched the decks, the rigging, and the cabins, but saw no sign of life or even death. It was as if the crew had simply vanished into thin air. When they finally made their way down into the captain's quarters, they found him sitting at his desk, seemingly frozen in time. His pen still clutched between his bony fingers, his eyes wide open staring off into the distance, his lips pulled back in a silent scream. The last entry in the ship's logbook read, "They are not my crew anymore," scrawled across the page in ink mixed with the captain's blood. As the townsfolk prepared to take the ship out into deeper water so they could begin searching for survivors, the rope they had secured around the bowsprit snapped without warning, as did the next one and the one after that. Fearful that the vessel might be carrying some kind of plague, the locals tried to push her out into the channel, but the ship didn't move. They returned to their homes, leaving the mysterious vessel where she was. But that night, the harbor was filled with screams. People awoke in their homes to the sound of men shouting and the creaking of ropes, as if the ship had come alive and was trying to free herself from her moorings. Some stood at their windows and saw strange shapes moving about on the deck, shadowy figures that seemed to pace back and forth endlessly. Others claimed to see pale faces gazing down at them from the rigging, faces with eyes that glowed an eerie red in the darkness. Then, as quickly as it began, the commotion on the ship fell silent. In the morning, the townspeople returned to the harbor and found the ship gone, vanished without a trace. A few weeks later, she reappeared, drifting slowly out to sea under full sail, as if she'd been waiting for just the right moment to escape the confines of the harbor. But there was no crew in sight, and no one knew where she'd been or where she was going. La Revanche hasn't been seen since, but some say that on stormy nights, the spectral glow of her lanterns can be seen faintly on the horizon, beckoning sailors to come and meet their doom. Those who have heard the knockings inside their ships when out at sea know better than to seek out the ghostly lights, because they know that following them will only lead to certain death. But how did the ship come to be cursed? What happened to her crew? Let's pull up a chair and get started. In 1738, the French East India Company established a base of operations in Loyang, France. The company built wharves, warehouses, and offices, and set up a shipyard to build new vessels. By 1745, they were operating more than 200 ships and employed thousands of sailors, merchants, and support staff. The Levant was largely responsible for supplying Europe with Asian goods such as silk, cotton, porcelain, and spices. However, trade with Asia was not always possible because of the political climate at the time. The European powers maintained colonies throughout the Indian Ocean region including Madagascar, Mauritius, Bourbon Island, now known as La Réunion, Seychelles, and many others. These colonial holdings provided a perfect place for ships to stop and resupply, without having to make the long voyage all the way back to Europe. However, the journey to the Far East was long and perilous, fraught with the risk of storms, disease, dwindling supplies, and attacks from pirates and rival navies. The officers and crews of the Levant ships often faced starvation, scurvy, insanity, and death. The merchants aboard these ships carried a variety of cargo, including manufactured goods from Europe, livestock such as cattle and pigs, and unfortunately, slaves captured from Africa. Due to the high mortality rate among sailors, it wasn't uncommon for ships to pick up additional crew members at their colonial ports, filling their ranks with men desperate to return home or those unlucky enough to have been captured by the ship as slavers. One such ship was the two-masted merchant vessel La Revenante, which departed Lorient in April 1746, bound for the island of Bourbon. The ship carried a load of cloth, brandy, tools, and livestock, as well as 12 European sailors and 6 African slaves. The first mate recorded that the journey began normally enough, though the weather was rough as the ship made her way down the coast of Africa. The crew hunted the pigs and cattle to eat fresh meat, and the mate reported that they even managed to catch several flying fish, which they cooked over an open fire on the deck. As they passed through the warm waters of the Gulf of Guinea, the crew became uneasy. The men spoke in hushed tones about stories of devil ships that preyed on unsuspecting sailors, vessels manned by demons that sucked the souls from men and left them empty husks. Despite the stories, the men continued their work until one day they noticed that the ocean around them had become unnaturally calm, almost as if there was a vast, invisible lid keeping the waves at bay. This was the first clue that they were being watched. The next entry in the logbook reads, "The men whisper of voices below deck. I hear nothing. Perhaps it is the humidity playing tricks on their minds." On July, the ship encountered a thick fog that covered the vessel like a shroud. Visibility was reduced to just a few feet. The crew struggled to keep the ship on course, and they dropped anchor at sunset, hoping to wait for the fog to lift. I am beginning to feel the effects of the heat. The men grow weaker every day, and their whispers become louder. They say they hear footsteps pacing below deck, though no one is there. I cannot hear anything, but then the lanterns have not yet been lit. A week passed, and the crew began to suffer from a lack of fresh food and water. Storms destroyed what little remained of their water supply, and the only meat they had left was the carcasses of the pigs and cattle they dehunted earlier in the trip. The men are weak and thirsty. They say the lanterns lit themselves last night. I refused to believe it, though, until this morning, when I saw the lantern hanging above the quarterdeck, swinging gently in the breeze, as if someone had lit it and then climbed into the rigging. I did not tell the men this, for I fear that their minds are already unhinged. July passed, and the ship continued her journey. But now, according to the log, strange things were happening at night. Things that would start happening more and more frequently. Something knocks from inside the hull of the ship. I do not know what it is, but it seems to come from within the ship itself. The men say that it sounds like screams sometimes, but I assure you, I hear nothing. Then came August, and with it, the entries in the logbook grew frantic, written in increasingly large letters with smear marks of ink and blood marring the pages. They are climbing the masts. They are everywhere. I locked myself in the cabin. Oh, God, help me! They scrape and claw at the doors. They are not my crew anymore. The rest of the logbook was filled with nothing but the sounds of chaos, of men screaming and the ship groaning and creaking as if in pain. When the ship arrived in Loryang, the townspeople were able to determine that everyone on board had disappeared. But how did they vanish? Did the crew abandon ship? Did they climb into the rigging and jump into the ocean? Were they taken by pirates or enemy vessels? All of these questions have gone unanswered for nearly 300 years. What we do know is that the captain was scared of whatever had happened to his crew. So scared, in fact, that he literally wrote his own death sentence. If the legend is to be believed, when the crew abandoned ship, they didn't head for the land. They headed for the deep. According to reports, anyone who hears knocking from inside the ship when out at sea should not investigate. If they open the hatch and look down into the dark depths of the hull, they will see La Revanche and her crew waiting to drag them down to the watery grave. Some say that the ship is still out there somewhere, adrift at sea, waiting for another crew to drag down into the darkness. Thank you for watching, and be sure to check out our other videos. And I'll see you next time